Think of the last thing you ate. Nothing important, an ordinary meal on an ordinary day. Try to see the plate in front of you, the light in the room, whoever was or wasn't sitting across from you. It comes back easily, and it feels like exactly what it is. A memory, a small and reliable record of something that really happened a few hours ago in a world that was already here to hold it. Now sit for a moment with the possibility that a handful of serious physicists have spent years of their careers trying, and mostly failing, to argue their way out of. There is a version of this universe in which that memory came from no meal at all. A version in which the mind holding it, your mind, the one receiving these words right now, assembled itself out of formless noise a few moments ago, already full-grown, already furnished with the memory of an entire life that was never lived, and in which, a little while from now, it will come apart just as quietly and settle back into the dark it rose from. Not as a dream, and not as some trick of a tired imagination, but as the plain, unforced consequence of a few laws of physics we already hold to be true. The strangeness runs deeper than a bare brain flickering in the void. The picture is not of something grey and inert appearing out of nothing. It is of a mind caught mid-thought, one that believes it has a name and a mother and a childhood. One that can picture the house it thinks it grew up in and feel the exact ache of things it thinks it lost. All of it arriving whole, in a single instant, out of the aimless jostling of particles that were never within 1,000 miles of a house, or a mother, or a childhood. The memories wouldn't be copies of real events. They would be first drafts, fiction the mind mistakes for history, because it has nothing else to hold them against. The idea has a name. Physicists call it the Boltzmann brain, after a man who died more than a century ago and never dreamed his name would end up here. It isn't a fringe notion whispered at the edges of science. It grows straight out of the middle of it, out of the physics of heat and disorder, out of the behavior of the early universe, out of the strange restlessness of empty space. And it has become respectable enough that careful cosmologists have written papers with titles as flat and worried as Why Boltzmann Brains Are Bad. Papers whose real purpose is to find some honest way of being sure that you are not one. The reasoning underneath it is almost embarrassingly simple, which is part of why it's so hard to wave away. Give the universe enough room, or enough time, and it may have limitless amounts of both, and everything that is merely possible stops being rare and becomes inevitable, not once, but without end. Whatever can assemble by chance eventually will assemble by chance, somewhere, at some point, and then somewhere else, and then again. A thin scattering of particles drifting in the cold has no plan and no purpose, but it has patience past any human measure, and given long enough it will, purely by accident, fall into the shape of a pebble or a snowflake or a working human eye, or a thinking brain, warm with a whole lifetime of invented memories, certain it has always been here. What troubles the physicists most is quieter than the idea itself, and it tends to linger. If this were true of you, if the mind taking in these words had come together out of nothing a few seconds ago, you would have no way at all of knowing it. You would feel precisely as certain as you feel now. The memories would seem exactly as solid, because they would be the only ones you had ever had. Even the act of doubting it, of turning the thought over and setting it down as impossible, would be part of what came together in the dark. There is no test you could run from the inside. There never has been. That is a cold thing to be handed on a quiet night, and there is no pretending otherwise. But stay with it, because it doesn't end where it begins. The universe that makes this idea possible is nearly 14 billion years old and wider than any honest attempt to picture it, and mostly empty and mostly dark. The nearest star to our own sun is so far away that its light, moving at the fastest speed the universe permits, takes more than 4 years to cross the gap. And that star is a near neighbor, practically next door, in a cosmos where almost everything is separated by distances that make 4 years look like nothing at all. Set against a background like that, a single human life is something close to a struck match, a brief, small warmth, lifted for a moment against an enormous night and then let go. And there is an unexpected mercy folded into that smallness. The same vastness that makes a Boltzmann brain thinkable also makes almost everything you carried into tonight. The conversation you keep replaying, the deadline, the thing you said and wish you hadn't, grow quiet and distant and small. Because whichever kind of mind you happen to be, the honest situation is the same, and it always has been. You have only ever known the world from inside your own experience of it. Not once have you stepped outside your own memory to hold it up against the thing it claims to record. Every reason you have to trust that your past is real arrives as one more thought, occurring now, in the present, the single moment any of us is ever actually given. That was true long before anyone imagined a mind condensing out of the void, and it will still be true long after the last of us is gone. Perhaps fear was never the right answer to it. Perhaps the truer answer is something closer to tenderness. For this moment and this awareness and the near impossible fact that there is anything here at all with the capacity to wonder whether it is real. This is a story that goes downward before it comes back up, down through the physics that makes the idea possible and the arithmetic that makes it worse, and then out the far side to the still place where it finally loosens its hold. If a channel that sits with you at this hour is something you'd like more of, you're welcome to subscribe, softly, without waking anyone. And if you'd like to leave a single thought behind before you drift off, let it be this one. If you could never, ever tell the difference, would you even want to know? It starts, the way so many of these stories start, with one person. A man with a heavy, dark beard, in the closing years of the 19th century, bent over a question about heat and time and disorder that would travel more than 100 years to reach you, lying here now. To understand how a brilliant and careful mind was led all the way to the edge of an idea like this, we have to go back to where it first took shape, to a quiet grave in the city of Vienna, and the single line of mathematics carved along the top of the stone. In a vast cemetery on the edge of Vienna, among the graves of composers and the long, quiet avenues of the ordinary dead, there stands a white marble bust of a man with a broad face and a heavy beard. He gazes slightly upward, past whoever happens to be standing in front of him, as though something overhead has caught his attention and held it. Carved into the stone above him, where another monument might offer a line of scripture or a few soft words of farewell, there is instead a single short equation. No explanation accompanies it. No translation. It is simply there, presented to the passing visitor as if its meaning were self-evident. It is anything but. To nearly everyone who wanders past, it reads as a small riddle in marble. Yet it is, in a genuine sense, the most important thing this man ever managed to say. The whole of a strange and quietly unsettling idea pressed down into a handful of symbols. It took the rest of the world decades to accept what those symbols mean. It took the man beneath them almost everything he had. His name was Ludwig Boltzmann, and he was born in Vienna in 1844. Across his life, he insisted on two things that a great many respected scientists of his day considered somewhere between unproven and faintly ridiculous. The first was that everything, this headstone, the air moving around it, the hand of anyone reaching out to touch the letters, is built from atoms, particles far too small ever to see, too many ever to count, in perpetual and invisible motion. The second idea was stranger, and it is the one that matters to the story that follows. Boltzmann argued that the great one-way rules of nature, the way heat always drains from hot to cold, the way things wear down and scatter and never gather themselves back together, are not truly rules at all. They are only overwhelming probabilities. A hot cup of coffee left on a table always cools to match the room around it, and the room never once gathers its warmth back into the cup. That looks like an iron law of nature, but Boltzmann saw that underneath it there is nothing but counting. There are almost unimaginably many ways for the coffee's heat to spread evenly out into the air, and vanishingly few ways for it to draw itself back together into the cup. So the heat spreads, not because some law forbids the alternative, but because the alternative is so wildly outnumbered that it essentially never happens. Order slides into disorder for the plainest of reasons. Disorder is simply more likely. Boltzmann gave that likelihood a name, entropy, and a way to measure it, and the short line on his grave is its definition. It says that the disorder of a thing can be counted, that it amounts to the number of different ways the thing's hidden pieces can be rearranged while it still looks exactly the same from the outside. This was not a welcome message. An influential circle of scientists and philosophers, with the physicist Ernst Mach and the chemist Wilhelm Ostwald among its leading voices, held that atoms were a fiction, a convenient bit of bookkeeping with no claim to being real because no one had ever laid eyes on one. To them, Boltzmann's swarming invisible particles were metaphysics wearing the costume of physics. The disputes were long and public and personal. Mach, alongside whom Boltzmann was obliged to work for a stretch of years, was more than an intellectual rival. The two men simply disliked one another, and Boltzmann carried the disagreement like a wound that would not close. He was defending a picture of reality he could feel in his bones was correct and could not yet compel anyone else to see. He was not, by temperament, a man built to carry that kind of unending resistance lightly. Those who knew him, and the biographers who later reassembled his life from his letters and his lectures, describe a person of enormous warmth and equally enormous fragility, brilliant, funny, generous, and subject to swings of mood so steep that a later age would most likely name them bipolar disorder. He would rise into stretches of tremendous energy and then sink into long troughs of exhaustion and gloom, and as he aged, and the central argument of his life ground on without resolution, the troughs deepened. In the accounts of his final years, you can feel the tiredness lifting off the page, the sense of a mind that had spent itself and could no longer find its way back to any kind of rest. In the late summer of 1906, Boltzmann took his wife and his youngest daughter to Duino, a small resort town on the Adriatic coast near Trieste, for a holiday by the sea. It was there, on that holiday, that he ended his own life. He was 62. The real reasons went into the ground with him. The illness that had shadowed him for decades was surely part of it. The long, unwon battle over his life's work may have been another, but no one now can separate the threads with any honesty. What can be said is gentler and sadder than any tidy explanation. The man who had shown the world that order is fragile, and that all things drift in time toward coming apart, was himself worn down and undone by a disorder he could not hold at bay, the quiet, chemical kind, the kind that unspools inside a single human mind. What happened next has the shape of a cruel joke, though nobody was in any mood to laugh. Within just a few years of his death, almost near enough to reach out and touch, the argument he had lost was decisively won. In the years just after 1906, the French physicist Jean Perrin studied the ceaseless random trembling of tiny particles suspended in a fluid, and showed that this trembling was precisely what you would see if the fluid were made of countless invisible atoms jostling and knocking the particles about. The atoms were real. They had always been real. Boltzmann had been right the entire time, and he did not live to hear a single person admit it. So the equation remained where it was, carved above his likeness in the Viennese cemetery, and it has outlasted him now by well over a century, the way the light of a star goes on crossing the dark for ages after the star itself has burned down to nothing. The man was gone. The idea he had folded into that one short line travelled on without him, and it reached in the end a great deal further than even he had realised. Because entropy does not stop at coffee cups and cooling rooms. Once you accept what Boltzmann accepted, that the orderly world around us rests on no guarantee, that it is only one of the improbable arrangements the universe happens for the moment to be wearing, a door swings open. And through that door, in time, walks something he never intended and would surely never have wanted. Boltzmann himself had already glanced through it once, briefly, more than a decade before that last summer beside the sea. Buried in a dry and technical quarrel about the behaviour of gases in the pages of a scientific journal in 1895, he had stopped to turn over a single possibility about the universe as a whole. It had almost nothing to do with the point he was arguing. He set it down in a few sentences, credited it to a young assistant, and moved on, with no apparent sense that he had just sketched, offhand and in passing, the faint outline of the very nightmare that would one day be made to carry his name. What if order is the accident, and emptiness is the rule? We tend to assume that a universe ought to have things in it, stars, galaxies, weather, us, the way a room ought to have furniture. It feels like the default setting of reality. But Boltzmann's own mathematics pointed somewhere far stranger. If disorder is so overwhelmingly more likely than order, then the natural, expected, resting state of everything is not a sky crowded with stars at all, but a thin and featureless haze, the same faint temperature in every direction, spread perfectly evenly across the whole of space, with nothing hot and nothing cold, no here that differs from any there, nothing happening and nothing left to happen. That smoothed-out stillness is where his equations said all things must finally arrive. Physicists call it thermal equilibrium. It is less a place than an ending, and it raised a question sharp enough to keep a careful mind awake at night. If disorder always wins in the end, and the universe has already had an immense stretch of time in which to play the game out, then why is there any order left at all? Why are we not already sitting, or rather, not sitting since there would be no one left to sit, in the middle of that featureless grey? Why is the sky not empty? The answer Boltzmann set down in the British journal Nature in 1895 is one of the most disquieting suggestions anyone has ever put into print. And in a detail that will only matter more as this story goes on, he did not present it as his own. He handed the credit to a young assistant of his, a man about whom history has kept almost nothing and whose name survives very largely because of this single idea, Ignaz Schütz. There is something almost too fitting in that. The thought that would grow over the next 100 years into one of the strangest fears in all of science began with a person we can barely make out, passed along in a sentence or two by his more famous employer. And it leaves a question hanging over everything that follows, whether it is entirely fair that the nightmare now wears Boltzmann's name, when the first glimpse of it may really have belonged to someone else. Boltzmann, to his credit, said as much in print. The credit drifted to him anyway, the way it tends to. Schütz's suggestion ran like this: perhaps the universe is not slowly making its way toward that dead, uniform stillness. Perhaps it is already there and has been for an eternity, silent and smooth and unchanging almost everywhere, almost always. And everything we have ever called the universe, every star that has ever burned, every galaxy, every living creature, the whole span of cosmic history as we picture it, would then be no part of the main story at all, but a single, local, wildly improbable exception to it. One small region where, purely by chance, the smooth haze happened to gather itself for a while into warmth and light and structure, before it inevitably settles back down and rejoins the stillness pressing in on every side. The scale of that idea is easy to underestimate. This is a far stranger and colder claim than the familiar one about the universe someday running down. The cold is not coming. The cold is already here, everywhere, and always has been, and the light and heat and motion of everything you have ever known is the rare exception to it, a brief accident presently in progress, in one unremarkable corner of an endless and sleeping dark. On this picture, you are not living in an orderly cosmos that is gradually winding down. You are living inside the winding down itself, inside a small swell of order that has already crested and begun to slide back toward the grey it rose out of. And there is a flaw folded into the idea, faint at first, that will slowly widen into the whole of the trouble ahead. Boltzmann had shown that large departures from equilibrium are far rarer than small ones. The greater the swing away from the featureless norm, the more staggeringly unlikely it becomes. A whole ordered universe is about as vast a swing as anyone could picture. So if such things do happen by pure chance, scattered across an eternity, then for every rare and enormous ripple like ours, there ought to be countless smaller ones. Modest little islands of order flickering up out of the grey and sinking back, far more often in far more places forever. The smallest arrangements would be the most common by an almost limitless margin, which invites a slow and uncomfortable thought. If we truly are a fluctuation, we appear to be an extravagantly, suspiciously large one. Schutz and Boltzmann never followed the idea that far. In 1895, it was a clever reply to a technical puzzle about gases and little more. But the seed was in the ground. More than 100 years later, other physicists would take up this exact chain of reasoning, an eternal, near-empty universe, rare fluctuations of order, the small ones outnumbering the large past, all counting, and follow it to a conclusion that would have appalled the gentle man now at rest in the Vienna cemetery. The very logic that lets a whole cosmos shimmer up out of the emptiness will, given long enough, shimmer up something far smaller and far stranger. A single island of order, just large enough to glance around itself and feel certain that it is real. The idea that may be turning over in your mind right now, as you lie in the dark, began its life as a footnote in an argument about gases. But every part of it, Schutz's whole improbable bubble, rests on one unspoken assumption, so familiar that we scarcely think to question it. The picture only holds together because time, in our experience, moves in a single direction, out of an ordered past and into a disordered future, and never once the reverse. And that plainest of everyday facts, the one thing no one has ever needed to have explained to them, turns out to be among the strangest and least understood features of the whole universe. A wine glass slips from the edge of a table and shatters on the floor. It is one of the most ordinary events in the world. Filmed and then played backward, though, that same small event becomes something no one has ever witnessed or ever will. A spray of glass splinters trembling on the tiles, then lifting, gathering, rushing inward, and springing up into a single unbroken glass that settles softly back onto the table's edge, without so much as a crack to show for the fall. The reversed film looks absurd. It looks like a quiet violation of reality itself. We never see it happen, not once, not anywhere, and the certainty that we never will runs about as deep as any certainty we have. Time moves one way. The past is finished. The future is open. And yet, the surprising thing, the thing that has unsettled physicists for a century and a half, is that this deep certainty has almost no support in the fundamental laws of nature. Looked at closely enough to follow the individual atoms in that shattering glass as they collide and rebound, every one of those collisions obeys rules that run exactly the same forward and backward. Reversing any single bounce, any lone exchange of energy between two particles, yields another perfectly lawful event, one that physics permits without the faintest complaint. Played frame by frame, the whole reversed film breaks not a single rule. Each shard, each collision, each impossible gathering together is, taken on its own, entirely allowed. The absurdity lives only in the whole, and this is the strangeness at the root of everything that follows. Nowhere in the deepest laws we have is there anything that says which way time is supposed to run. The arrow is real. Nothing in the machinery beneath it points. It would be one thing if this were the quirk of a single obscure law. It is not. Nearly every fundamental description we possess of how the world works, the mechanics of colliding particles, the behavior of electricity and magnetism, the rules that steer light itself, is almost perfectly even-handed about the direction of time. Run the equations forward or backward, and they hold equally well either way. There are one or two exotic exceptions buried in the physics of certain rare particle decays, but they are far too faint and too specialized to account for anything as sweeping and relentless as the plain difference between yesterday and tomorrow. So we are left in a genuinely uncomfortable position, a universe that moves in one direction with utter conviction, built out of laws that can barely tell the two directions apart. We have already met the reason the broken glass never reassembles, in the way heat drains from warm things and order slides into disorder. It is a matter of sheer counting. Out of all the countless ways the pieces could move, only a vanishing few would carry them back together, and blind chance almost never lands on those few. That much is settled, and on its own it is not disturbing. But folded inside this comfortable explanation is a second edge, sharper than the first, and it was noticed almost at once, gently and devastatingly, by a close friend of Boltzmann's, a fellow Viennese physicist named Joseph Loschmidt. Loschmidt saw that the counting argument carries no sense of direction in it at all. It says that a rare state of low disorder is overwhelmingly likely to be followed by states of higher disorder. But the very same reasoning turned around says that same rare state was overwhelmingly likely to have been preceded by higher disorder too. The mathematics simply does not contain the words before and after. Hand it a single perfect snapshot of an orderly moment, stripped of all context, and ask which way time is flowing, and it cannot answer. From any peak of order, disorder slopes away downhill in both directions at once. And so the counting, left to itself, cannot deliver the one thing we most wanted from it, an explanation of why the past is so deeply different from the future. Why yesterday is a place of settled, orderly facts, while tomorrow is only fog. Worse still, it cannot account for that orderly past at all. By its own blind logic, an ordered yesterday is not what it should expect to find waiting behind this moment. This is where the comfortable story turns cold, and the trap is best understood by walking a single step into it before we climb back out. Take the counting argument at its word. Apply it honestly to the ordered world sitting in front of you right now, this room, the memories in your head, the ancient light still arriving from the stars. And it does not promise you that any of this grew out of a genuinely more ordered past. It suggests instead that the cheapest and likeliest way for everything you are experiencing to exist is not the long, orderly history you seem to remember, but a single random shudder in the disorder that produced precisely this much order, and not one scrap more, a moment ago. Followed all the way to its own conclusion, the mathematics does not point back toward a real past. It points back toward a fluke wearing the costume of one. No physicist actually believes that, and you are not being asked to either. The world did not shudder into being an instant ago. Memories and starlight and all, and the reasons for trusting so, are real ones. But the price of that escape deserves a clear look, because it is neither free nor tidy. To rule out the fluke, to win back the plain and necessary belief that our memories are records of things that truly happened, physicists had to reach past their equations entirely and add, by hand, a single assumption those equations could never supply on their own. An assumption about how everything began. And when that one small assumption is scaled all the way up, from a wineglass on a kitchen floor to the birth of the cosmos itself, it becomes one of the largest and least understood facts in all of science, that time began in a state of almost unthinkable order and has been spending that order down, like an inheritance, every moment since. We spend a great deal of worry on how things end. The candle gutters, the body wears out, the universe drifts toward cold and dark. Endings feel like the natural home of dread, the place our fears go to settle. But a strange inversion sits at the very center of modern physics, and once you have seen it, you cannot quite unsee it. The cold, dark future you are afraid of is the least mysterious thing about the universe. It is exactly what every law predicts and every count demands. Things come apart because there are so many more ways to be broken than to be whole. The real mystery runs entirely the other way. It is not that the universe is winding down toward disorder. It is that it was ever wound up. That winding up is the assumption physicists were forced to add by hand, the one thing their equations could never give them on their own. Boltzmann's own answer, that our whole ordered world is a chance fluctuation out of an eternal grey stillness, did not survive. It buckled under exactly the problem we have been circling, the way the counting refuses to prefer a real past over a lucky accident. So, cosmology reached for a different answer, and it is the one we still hold today. The universe was not always here, drifting at equilibrium. It had a beginning, and it began in a state of almost perfect order. Everything since, the entire one-way flow of time, is the slow unwinding of that first pristine condition. Grant that beginning, and your memories become trustworthy again. The broken glass stays broken, and the arrow of time points the way it should. Refuse it, and the whole nightmare comes flooding back. The strange part is that the early universe does not look, at first glance, like order at all. It was blazing hot, impossibly dense, and very nearly the same in every direction, a smooth, featureless fire filling all of space. Smoothness sounds like the opposite of structure. But where gravity is in charge, the rules invert. Gravity is the great gatherer. Left to itself, it draws matter together into clumps, and clumps into stars, and stars into the black holes that are, in the end, the most disordered objects the universe can make. A smooth, even spread of matter is not gravity's resting state. It is the exact opposite. A boulder balanced at the very summit of a hill, holding still only because it has not yet begun to roll. The early universe was that boulder, poised and even, holding a whole cosmos of order in the sheer smoothness of its arrangement. Order that gravity would spend across billions of years, rolling it down into galaxies and stars, and at the last, into the dark. And it was wound almost unbelievably tight. Roger Penrose once tried to put a number on how special that beginning was, how finely the universe had to be arranged, out of all the ways it might have started, to begin as smoothly as ours did. The figure he arrived at is not one the mind can hold. The odds against it, by his estimate, were something like 1 in a number written as a single 1, followed by more zeros than there are particles in the entire observable universe, and no one knows why. That deserves to be said plainly, stripped of the usual reassurance. This is not an open question of the ordinary kind, the sort science is content to leave on the table for a later generation to close. It is a gap of a stranger and more troubling sort. The best answer we have, a burst of runaway expansion in the universe's first instant, ironing everything flat, is elegant and well supported, and yet it has a habit of pushing the question back rather than closing it, since that smoothing burst appears to need its own carefully ordered starting point in order to begin. The improbability does not vanish. It only retreats one step further upstream toward the source. But the true trouble is not merely that the beginning was ordered beyond reason. It is that it was ordered so much more than it ever needed to be. All of this order was supposed to buy one thing: the existence of observers, minds able to look around and take the measure of things. So how much order does that actually take? The counting gives a brutal answer. The cheapest, likeliest way for a universe to produce a single observer is not to build 100 billion galaxies and let them turn for 13 billion years. It is to assemble the least possible island of order, just enough to hold one mind and the thin shell of world it can perceive, and nothing beyond that. Measured against that minimum, our universe is gratuitously overbuilt. It is as though, to account for one lit candle in a dark house, we found not a single struck match beside it, but an entire mansion raised around it, every brick laid true, every window glazed, immaculate to the horizon. We are far more improbable than anything about us ever required, and the same cold logic we leaned on to escape the fluke has never once stopped pointing, quietly, at the cheaper thing we might have been instead. The order we were handed at the beginning is real then, and finite, and already draining away beneath us. Whether it is enough to make us real, genuinely, solidly real, and not the thrifty imitation the counting keeps gesturing toward, turns out to depend on something we have not yet thought to ask about at all. We have spent this long looking backward at how the universe began. The question that decides everything faces the other way. How does it end? And the answer, as far as anyone can now tell, is that it may not end at all. Nearly 14 billion years is the entire age of the universe so far. Measured against a human life, it is an unthinkable span, and measured against all of recorded history, it may as well be eternity. But set it against the future the universe has ahead of it, and those 14 billion years shrink to almost nothing, less than the first breath of a life that runs on without end. We are not living in the universe's old age, or even its afternoon. We are barely past its first hour, and the overwhelming bulk of the story, nearly all of it, unfolds in a slowly deepening dark. The reason that future runs so long and closes so strangely comes down to a discovery made only at the very end of the 20th century. Astronomers had assumed that cosmic expansion, set going at the beginning, must be gradually slowing under the accumulated pull of all the matter inside it, that gravity would, over the ages, quietly apply the brakes. When they finally measured it with care, using the light of distant, exploding stars, they found the opposite. The expansion was quickening, accelerating year over year, as though something were pressing space apart from the inside. We still do not know what that something is. We call it dark energy, which is mostly a polite name for our ignorance, and as far as our best measurements can currently tell, it is winning, and it will go on winning. An accelerating expansion carries one merciless consequence. Every distant galaxy is being swept away from us, and the farther off it lies, the faster it goes, until, past a certain distance, it recedes more quickly than its own light can cross the widening gap toward us. One by one, across the coming ages, the galaxies will slip over that edge and disappear, their light stretched and reddened and dimmed until it fails entirely. They will not explode or collapse. they will simply recede beyond all possible seeing and be gone. And if you could somehow stand on a dead world in that far era and turn your eyes upward, you would find a single faint smudge of stars adrift in the sky, and past it, nothing at all. No other galaxies, no distant glow, only a black so complete that you would have no way, even in principle, of ever knowing the rest of the universe had once been there. Losing the far galaxies is only the first act. The dying that follows is slow and staged, and each stage dwarfs all the time that has passed since the beginning. Stars are not forever. They shine by burning through the gas they were born from, and that supply runs out. Somewhere around 100 trillion years from now, a span beside which the present age of the universe is a rounding error, the last of the usable gas will be spent, the final generation of stars will form, and never again will a new star catch light. The last star to shine will gutter out like the final lit window in a sleeping city, except that this time no dawn is scheduled to follow, and that twilight lasts almost past reckoning. The entire bright age of the cosmos, the whole era of living stars, from the very first to the very last, is only a brief opening chapter. The long dark that comes after it runs many, many times longer, nearly all of the story told in a theatre with the lights already gone out. Even the embers go cold in the end. When the last flicker of starlight has died, the universe is left to its final tenants, black holes, the collapsed hearts of the largest dead stars, and the giants that brood at the centres of galaxies. For an almost unthinkable stretch, they are all that remains, the last islands of structure in a darkening cosmos. But not even they endure. Over spans so vast that the figures stop carrying any feeling, the largest of them lasting something on the order of a 1 followed by 100 zeros, counted in years, the black holes themselves dwindle and leak away, evaporating down to the faintest possible trace until nothing built or bound or structured is left anywhere at all. What follows has a name, the Dark Era, a universe of thin, cold, scattered particles drifting apart in a cold so complete it seems like the very floor of what cold can be, still expanding, still thinning forever. And there is one detail that turns this long, sad story into a genuinely strange one. None of it, the emptying sky, the dying stars, the evaporating black holes, is building toward an ending. There is no final moment, no wall at the end of time, no last page waiting to be turned. The universe does not stop. It simply thins and cools and carries on, a cold and ever-widening emptiness of the kind physicists call de Sitter space, named for Willem de Sitter, the Dutch astronomer who first worked out its endless geometry. There is no closing date written anywhere in the physics. We carry an unspoken assumption that everything runs down and finishes. The deepest surprise waiting in the far future is that finishing may not be on offer at all. Forever is not the strange exception. As far as we can tell, forever is the plan. An eternity of empty, freezing dark is not, at first, a frightening thing to picture. It sounds almost like peace. The universe brought at last to permanent rest, with nothing left to happen and no one left to see it. But an eternity is exactly what the cheaper, colder possibility had been waiting for all along. The counting never stopped pointing at it, a scrap of order far smaller than a universe, needing only time and enough silent space in order to occur. This future offers both, without limit and without end. And there is one more thing the word empty quietly gets wrong. That cold and motionless space, stretching away forever in all directions, is not nearly as empty as it looks. And what waits, hidden inside it, is where the real trouble begins. In that far era, with the stars gone dark, the galaxies fled beyond reach, and the last of the black holes gone, what remains is as close to empty as the universe will ever come. There is almost no matter left, no light, no warmth, no event of any kind anywhere from one dark horizon to the other. It is a stillness deeper than any that has ever existed, the bare, unfurnished dark of a cosmos with nothing left to do and forever in which to not do it. And the great, quiet surprise of modern physics is that this stillness is not truly still, and this emptiness is not truly empty. It never can be. Empty space, it turns out, is not the inert stage we imagine it to be. Strip away every particle, every scrap of light, and what is left over is not a clean and silent nothing, but a faint, ceaseless restlessness, a trembling woven into the fabric of space itself. The invisible fields that fill the universe, the ones whose ripples we usually notice as particles and forces, can never hold perfectly, absolutely still. At the smallest scales they shiver, always, with a jitter that no amount of cooling and no passage of time can ever quiet. This is not a theorist's fancy. That restlessness has been measured. Bring two polished metal plates close together in the emptiest vacuum we can make, a hair's breadth apart, and they feel a faint push toward one another, nudged together by the seething of the emptiness on every side. The nothing between them presses. The void has a texture, and it can be felt. But there is a second, stranger source of warmth in the far future, and it belongs to the shape of the dying universe itself. An eternally expanding cosmos, we have seen, wraps itself in a horizon, a boundary so far out that anything beyond it is fleeing faster than its own light can ever return. In the 1970s, a handful of physicists, among them Gary Gibbons and Stephen Hawking, uncovered something deeply counterintuitive about horizons of this kind. A horizon is not cold and dead. It glows. Like the rim of a black hole, the far boundary of an expanding universe radiates a faint heat inward, bathing all the space inside it in a thin, even warmth that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And because the expansion runs on forever, that warmth never fades and never lifts. The far future does not cool all the way down to absolute zero, as everything in our experience says it should. It cools until it reaches this one faint floor, and then it stops and holds there at a fixed and final temperature for the rest of eternity. How faint is it? Almost beyond meaning. To write down the temperature of that empty, eternal space, you would set a 0 and a decimal point, and then some 30 more zeros, before you ever reached the first digit that mattered, a warmth so slight that no instrument the universe could ever hold would have the faintest hope of feeling it. For every practical purpose, it is nothing. It is colder than the coldest place that has ever been, colder than the deepest gulf between the galaxies today, closer to true nothing than anything has ever come. But it is not zero. It is never, ever quite zero. And that difference, the difference between almost nothing and truly nothing, turns out to be the whole of the difference between a universe that rests in peace and one that never can. It has to be said plainly, before we go on, that there is a real argument about how literally to take all of this. The picture of the vacuum as a bubbling cauldron of things flickering in and out of a warm and restless void is the standard way physicists speak, and it has carried the field a long way. But some of them hold that a truly unchanging emptiness is exactly that, unchanging, with nothing whatsoever actually happening inside it, no matter how long you wait. Whether the void merely looks restless or genuinely does things is among the least settled questions in all of physics, and it is the hinge on which this whole story, much further down, will turn. For now, the mainstream picture is the one to hold on to, because it is the one that makes the trouble. And the trouble is this. Take a faint warmth that never switches off, and give it not 1 billion years, not 1 trillion, but an eternity with no end at all. and you have built something far more dangerous than it looks. A warm bath, however cool, is a place where things are endlessly being jostled and rearranged, sampled and reshuffled through every possible combination. Given enough time, such a bath does more than stir. It explores, working its way with the blind patience of the truly eternal through arrangement after arrangement after arrangement, until sooner or later, far more later than sooner, it stumbles into arrangements that have no business existing at all. The total heat in all that emptiness is almost too small to speak of. A single dying ember's worth of warmth smeared across an ocean that has no shore and no floor, so thin it is a whisper of nothing. But the ember never goes out, and the ocean is endless, and there is no final day on which the reshuffling stops. And that same faint restlessness is not only a feature of the far future. It is here, in the dark around you right now. The very same trembling emptiness filling this room, filling the spaces inside the atoms of your own body. You are steeped in it, and have never once felt it, and you never will. Given time enough, not the handful of years that belong to any of us, but the endless time that belongs to the universe. That patient, formless trembling can gather itself, out of pure chance, into something that was never meant to be there. So what is the smallest thing the universe can build by accident that knows it is there? Not the smallest living cell, or the smallest planet, or the smallest star, the smallest thing that experiences, that sits somewhere in the dark and thinks, however briefly, I am here. It is a strange question, and for almost all of human history, no one had any reason to ask it. But once you take seriously what the far future actually offers, an eternal warmth, an endless dark, and the blind, tireless patience to try every arrangement of matter there is, the question stops being idle. It becomes the only one that matters. Because whatever that smallest possible witness turns out to be, the universe will produce it far, far more often than anything larger. The reason comes down to a single brutal fact about chance, first pointed out in the 1930s by the astronomer Arthur Eddington. A large fluctuation is not merely a little less likely than a small one. It is exponentially less likely, punishingly, catastrophically less likely, and every extra particle the emptiness is asked to place correctly multiplies the odds against it again. To go from a fluctuation the size of a speck of dust to one the size of a grain of sand does not make it 1,000 times rarer or 1,000,000. It piles zero upon zero onto the odds until the mind simply gives up trying to follow. So if such accidents happen at all, across the long reach of eternity, the small ones happen incomparably more often than the large. The void deals overwhelmingly in the cheap and the minimal. The grand and the elaborate it almost never touches. The direction of all this is, by now, familiar. Away from whole ordered universes and toward the least island of order that will do the job. But the logic does not stop there. Pressed all the way to its floor, it goes somewhere colder than it first appears. Ask what the cheapest possible observer really is. The very least the void must assemble to produce a mind having your exact experience this instant, and the honest answer strips almost everything away. The room does not need to be there. A room reaches a mind only as a pattern of signals inside it. The body does not need to be there. The body, too, is known only from within. There need not be a world at all. Everything present in a single moment of experience, every sight, every sound, the whole felt weight of a life stretching back behind it, exists, as far as the experiencing goes, as one arrangement of matter in one small place. And that arrangement, and nothing more, is all the emptiness actually has to build. That is the thing itself. Out of the endless faint trembling of empty space, once in an unspeakable while, the particles fall by blind chance into exactly the pattern of a mind caught in a single moment of thought. It comes into being already convinced that it has a past, that there is a world around it, that it has been alive for years and will go on living. And it is mistaken in every one of those convictions, because in truth it has existed for a fraction of a second, and in another fraction it will be gone, unraveled back into the noise it came from. Physicists have a name for this uninvited guest. They call it a Boltzmann brain, and its modern form was set down in 2004 by two physicists, Andreas Albrecht and Lorenzo Sorbo, following a thread that Eddington had first pulled almost 100 years before. It is, as far as anyone can tell, the most efficient, conscious thing the universe knows how to make. Efficient is not the same as easy. To throw together even the barest working mind, the void must arrange something on the order of the number of particles in a small object, a figure with more than 20 zeros, into precisely the right places at precisely the right instant, and the improbability of that is a number with some 60 zeros of its own. It is a staggering, almost meaningless unlikelihood. And yet, set beside the alternative, it is a bargain. Picture a windstorm working across an enormous beach. Every so often, by sheer accident, the blowing sand falls into the shape of a single letter. A short word would be far rarer, a whole sentence rarer still by an immense margin, and an entire book, every page in order, would not appear once in the whole age of the universe. So the beach, over time, fills with stray letters and the occasional short word, and never once with a library. The emptiness is that beach. A single conscious mind is a short word scratched in the sand. A whole ordered cosmos, with its 100 billion galaxies and its long and lawful history, is the library, and the universe spells short words uncountably more often than it builds libraries. Which leaves a genuinely vertiginous conclusion, quietly arrived at. The universe's single most efficient way of producing an observer, a thing that looks around and thinks I exist, is not a planet, not an ocean warming under a young sun, not 4 billion years of life slowly climbing toward awareness. It is a lone, deluded mind, assembled from cold noise, believing in a past that never happened, and gone again before it can so much as finish the thought. And the part we will have to face squarely before long is that such a mind would have no way of knowing what it was. It would feel exactly the way you feel right now, as settled, as certain, as sure of the life behind it as you are of yours. A mind from noise is not impossible then. It is only staggeringly unlikely, one chance in that number, with its 60 trailing zeros. But strange as it sounds, that is not the figure that should keep you awake. The truly dizzying number answers a different question altogether. How long a patient, eternal universe would have to wait before it began making these minds in earnest? And that number is so large that merely trying to write it down is a kind of falling. There is a kind of number that does something strange to the mind. You reach for it the way you would reach to picture 1,000 or 1,000,000 or even 1,000,000,000, and your hand closes on nothing. 1,000,000,000 at least you can approach. It is roughly the number of seconds in 30 years, or the grains of sand in a modest heap. The numbers we are about to meet offer no such handhold. They are not larger versions of familiar quantities, but a different kind of thing altogether, and the honest first response to them is not wonder. It is a quiet, spreading blankness. The improbability of a single Boltzmann brain, we found, came to a number with around 66 zeros. That already sounds like the far edge of what large numbers can do. It is barely the first step, because to turn that improbability into a stretch of time, to ask how long a patient universe must wait before one such brain flickers into being, you do not multiply by it or square it, or anything so mild. You raise 10 to the power of it. The wait, in years, is a one trailed by a run of zeros so long that the number of those zeros is itself the 66 zero figure we started with. The exponent has grown too large to write, so now it needs an exponent of its own. This is what mathematicians call a power tower, a number stacked upon a number, each floor lifting the one above it clean out of reach. It helps to hold up, for comparison, something we already thought was vast. The very last black holes take something on the order of a googol of years to evaporate. A googol being a 1 with 100 zeros behind it, a span so long it makes the present age of the universe look like a single tick of a clock. Set that beside the weight for one brain, and it does not merely shrink, it vanishes. The entire black hole era, written out in full, would not reach even the first landing of the tower we are now climbing. And the tower has more flaws because the physicists who took these questions seriously did not stop at brains. In 1994, working through the far fate of an eternal cosmos, the physicist Don Page calculated how long it would take for the entire universe, not a brain, not a galaxy, but everything, to return purely by chance to a state indistinguishable from one it had already passed through. The figure he arrived at is a power tower 5 floors high, 10 raised to 10, raised to 10, raised to 10, raised to 10, with one small number resting at the very top. Page remarked, almost in passing, that as far as he knew, this was the longest finite length of time ever explicitly worked out by any physicist, the largest meaningful number anyone had ever had reason to write down. And it names something real, a moment unthinkably far beyond the death of the last star, when the dice of the whole cosmos happened to fall exactly as they once fell. The strangest feature of numbers like these is what becomes of the units. Ordinarily, whether you count in seconds or in years matters a great deal. A single year holds some 30 million seconds, and the gap between the two is the gap between a heartbeat and a lifetime. But at the height of a power tower, that gap disappears completely. Converting from seconds to years, or even to the entire present age of the universe, alters only a vanishing sliver of the number, buried so deep within the tower that no instrument and no mind could ever register the difference. The figure has grown so large that it swallows its own units whole. And once that happens, the ordinary question, how long is that, has stopped meaning anything at all, because how long was always a question about units, and the units are gone. Honesty demands a word about what it feels like to stand in front of a number like this, because the feeling is part of the truth of it. It does not fill the mind with wonder, the way a mountain or a night sky does. What it produces is closer to a soft static, a gentle switching off, as the mind reaches for a scale it has no equipment to hold and comes back empty-handed. That emptiness is not a failure to understand. It is, in its own strange way, the most honest understanding on offer. We are built to feel the difference between one and many, between a day and a year, between near and far. We were never built to feel the difference between a number and 10 raised to the power of that number. When the imagination goes quiet in the face of these figures, it is not falling short. It is telling the truth about its own size. And now comes the turn that carries all of this from the merely dizzying into the genuinely disturbing. Every one of these monstrous spans, the wait for a brain, the recurrence of the whole universe, is still finite. Each one, however impossibly tall, comes to an end, and the future the universe is drifting into does not. However long the wait for the improbable, an eternity is longer. Given forever, a wait as tall as that tower is no barrier at all. It is a brief pause, repeated without limit, again and again and again, world without end. Which means these accidental minds are not a curiosity that might in principle occur once. In an eternal universe, they occur endlessly. And that raises the one question this whole story has been circling toward, the question almost no one wanted to ask aloud. Across all that endless time, which is truly the more common, minds like ours or minds like them? The answer, taken purely as arithmetic, is not close. It is not even a contest. Minds like ours, minds that grew slowly out of a warm and lawful world, are limited in number. There will only ever be so many of them. A vast crowd, but a crowd with an edge to it, a last member standing somewhere at the end of the line. Minds of the other kind, the ones that flicker up out of the cold, complete and mistaken and brief, have no such edge. They are not limited at all. And in any race between a number that stops and a number that does not, the number that does not always wins. To see why our kind must run out, it helps to remember everything the ordinary way of making a mind demands. It wants stars to forge the heavier elements and pour warmth into the dark, and planets cooled and settled with oceans and weather and the patience of deep time, and a chemistry lucky enough to stumble into life, and then billions of years of that life failing and trying and failing again, climbing by tiny increments towards something that can finally look up and wonder. Every step of it belongs to the bright, brief era we happen to live in. The narrow opening chapter, some 10 or 15 billion years wide, in which stars still burn and worlds still form. When that chapter closes, as it must, the whole machinery of natural minds powers down along with it. However many evolved observers the universe manages to make in that window, and it may be a staggering number, it makes its last one, and then never makes another. The other kind asks for none of this. A Boltzmann brain needs no star, no planet, no ancestry, no long apprenticeship of evolution. It needs only the two things the far future holds in endless supply: a faint, restless warmth that never switches off, and time with no end at all. So while our kind stays confined to that single bright chapter near the beginning, the other kind goes on being minted forever, all down the endless dark that follows, one every unspeakable once in a while, yes, but forever, with no last one, ever. A trickle that never stops will always outrun a flood that does. Given enough time, and there is always enough time, the slow drip wins. Set the two side by side, and the comparison collapses into something almost too simple to be this frightening. Against infinity, every finite number is the same size, and that size is nothing. It makes no difference how vast the crowd of evolved minds grows. A trillion, more minds than there are atoms in 1,000 universes, because once any of it is divided into an endless supply of fluctuations, its share of the whole rounds at once, and exactly to zero. Out of every mind that will ever exist, gathered into one impossible and endless census, a single name drawn blindly would belong, with a certainty as near to total as anything in physics, to a thing that congealed for an instant out of the cold, and not to anyone who ever grew up in a real world. The typical observer, the one anyone would expect to be, knowing nothing else, is a Boltzmann brain. This is not a small adjustment to our sense of things. It is the arithmetic, quietly insisting that reality's ordinary product, the mind the universe turns out by default and without intention, is not the child or the astronomer, but the brief delusion in the dark, and that all of evolved history, every real life ever lived, is the rare and lucky exception. And that is the precise shape of the vertigo. You feel entirely ordinary, like precisely what you take yourself to be, a person with a childhood, a body, a world that stood here before you and will stand after. Typical, in a word. But if the arithmetic holds, typical is the trap. Typical is the ghost, the overwhelming majority of all the minds that will ever think the thought, "I am here," will be wrong about how they came to think it, brief forgeries of a life, each one as sure of its own reality as the last. Picture a single genuine photograph adrift in an endless drift of fakes, every fake flawless, every fake certain that it is the original. That is the census the universe appears to be running, and nothing an observer can find, looking only inward, sets the true one apart from all the rest. There is, it must be said, one loose thread in all of this, and it repays a gentle pull. The whole argument turns on the word outnumber, on the claim that the ghosts are more plentiful than the born. But both groups, in an eternal universe, run to infinity, and holding one infinity up against another is a famously treacherous business. Ask the question the wrong way, and you can make either side come out ahead. There may be no single, correct way to take the count at all. Physicists call this the measure problem, and some of them suspect it is exactly where the whole nightmare will one day come apart. We raise it now only to be honest, and to leave a marker we will want later, because as things stand, no one has yet found a way of counting that makes the strangers vanish. And until someone does, the arithmetic keeps handing back the same unwelcome answer. So the arithmetic for now points where it points, and it points somewhere close to intolerable. That the ordinary mind, the standard issue observer, is a fluctuation in the dark. Which leaves the question that has been waiting since the very first minutes of this story, the one the Count finally makes impossible to keep avoiding. If the typical mind is a ghost, and a ghost carries the same certainty, the same memories, the same unshakable sense of a real past that you carry right now, then how, from the inside, would you ever tell the difference? The scene, right now, is an ordinary one. Wherever you happen to be, a bed, a dark room, a pair of headphones in the stillness, there is a quiet and a voice and the settled weight of a whole day resting behind you. It is about as unremarkable a moment as a life ever contains, and it is exactly the moment this long argument has been walking toward all along, because everything you could point to right now as proof that this moment is real, the solidity of the world, the memories stacked up behind you, the plain and obvious fact that you are here to notice any of it, every last piece of that is also available, whole and indistinguishable, to a mind that assembled itself out of the cold 1 second ago. The first and most natural defense comes almost at once. You remember, you have a past, not a vague impression of one, but a dense, particular, textured past, full of specific faces and specific rooms, and the exact taste of specific afternoons. Surely that sheer weight of detail is proof of something real. But it is not, and the reason is simple and total. A mind fluctuated into being an instant ago would carry memories of exactly that density and exactly that texture. Vividness is not a message sent forward to you out of the past. It is a property of the arrangement you are in right now, of the way the matter happens this second to be put together. A fabricated memory does not feel thin or forged or dreamlike. It feels precisely like this. It has to. It is built from the very same stuff as the real thing, because from the inside, the real thing was also never anything more than a present arrangement. And here the flaw gives way in earnest. You might think to test your memories against one another, to hunt them for the cracks and contradictions a forgery would surely betray. But every reason you have to trust your memory is itself a memory. The sense that your recollections hold together, the corroborating details that seem to confirm each other, the calm, confident feeling of, "I clearly remember this," all of it reaches you now, in this instant, as part of the very same package that is under suspicion. There is no separate higher ground to climb to and look down from, no vantage outside your own mind from which to inspect your mind. To check the past, you would have to consult the past, and the only copy of it you will ever hold is the one folded into your head at this second, whether that second is the latest in 80 years of them, or the first and the last you will ever have. Then, at the very bottom, there is the last thing anyone reaches for, the bedrock beneath all the arguing. But I know this is real. I can feel that it is. That certainty is the deepest instinct we have, and it deserves to be treated gently because it is going nowhere. It will still be here, intact, when this chapter is over. But as a piece of evidence, it is worth nothing, and it never was. Consider what certainty actually is: a sensation, a specific, warm, settled feeling the brain produces about the contents of its own attention. And a mind assembled from noise produces that identical feeling at identical strength about contents that are wholly false. The conviction is entirely real. What the conviction is about may be nothing at all. And from the inside, those two situations feel exactly, perfectly the same. So every test collapses, and it collapses each time for the same reason. The one running the test is part of the thing being tested. Even doubt is no way out. This very act of standing back and examining it all, the cool sense that you are working through it carefully and honestly, that too is only one more motion of the same arrangement, as easily fabricated as any memory. It is like standing in a hall of mirrors and searching for the one real face among the reflections, and slowly realizing that the searcher and the search and the very doubt about the mirrors are all of them reflections thrown by the same glass. There ought, by every right, to be a test somewhere in here. Some clever question you might put to yourself, some quiet experiment you could run alone in the dark that would settle the matter for good. There is not. Not one that works from the inside, and the inside is the only place any mind has ever stood. This is the flaw of the dive. It is the same thought that opened all of this in the very first minutes, returned now carrying its full weight. That this moment, and the 5 minutes you feel certain came before it, the settling in, the reaching for the dark, the first words of this voice, could every last bit of it be a single seamless instant, delivered whole, a heartbeat old, wearing the mask of an entire life. There is no honest way to prove otherwise, and we have come all the way down here together into the cold and the deep quiet, because this is where the argument runs out of flaw, but it is not, mercifully, where the story runs out. Because here you are, still here, still listening. Whatever this moment is, and whatever assembled it, it is beyond any doubt happening, and that one plain fact, the single thing this whole argument cannot reach in and take from you, turns out to be a loose thread. An end the nightmare never noticed it had left untied. And when a handful of physicists finally took hold of that thread and pulled, the way back toward the light did not open in some remote and abstract equation. It opened in the most ordinary thing imaginable, in the very fact that you are here now, having an experience at all. That fact, that you are here, taking something in, leads somewhere strange, and for once, somewhere hopeful. You might expect that the more of a universe a mind can take in, the more stars and history and detail it holds, the more likely it must be some grand and elaborate fluctuation. The truth runs the other way. The more you can see, the less likely you are a ghost. The road back into the light does not run through seeing less. It runs through noticing, carefully, just how enormously much you are seeing right now. The cheapest possible mind, the one the void produces most often, we pictured as small, and it is. But the deeper point is that its experience would be small too. To fluctuate a brain that merely has some experience, any experience at all, is far, far easier than to fluctuate one whose experience happens to hang together into a coherent, lawful, consistent world. Coherence is expensive, a single instant of sensible, rule-abiding reality costs the void enormously more than a single instant of gibberish. And so the overwhelming majority of these accidental minds, if they open onto anything, open onto chaos, a smear of disconnected sensation, a nonsense instant, a flash of static with no world behind it and none to come. It would open on pure incoherence and close on it just as fast, a mind with one senseless impression and nothing on either side of it, gone before the nonsense could so much as be recognized as nonsense. That is what a typical Boltzmann brain would find waiting for it. Not a cosmos, but a jumble. What you have is nothing like that jumble. You have a whole world, stitched edge to edge, holding together in every direction you turn to look. 100 billion galaxies, every one of them running on the same short handful of physical laws. A past that does not contradict itself. A room that stays exactly where you left it when you glance away and glance back. Every one of those consistencies is order, improbable, expensive order, and a fluctuation would have to buy all of it, down to the last detail. The bare brain, we found, cost a number with 66 zeros. The whole coherent, lawful world you seem to be sitting inside costs a number with well past 100 zeros, and each extra zero is another factor of 10 stacked against it, ever tumbling out of the noise by accident. To wake, as you have, into a seamless and reasonable universe is to be holding a forgery so vast and so intricate that blind chance almost never manages to make one. There is a quiet irony here, and after so long in the dark, it is a pleasure to sit with. The very thing that troubled us most at the outset, that our universe is drenched in far more order than any observer strictly needs, turns all the way around and becomes our strongest reason to trust that we are real. The excess was a curse when we were trying to explain it. It is a gift when we are trying to survive the argument. You are not a lone flicker in an ocean of static. You are set inside a cathedral of consistency, and cathedrals do not fall together out of the wind. For the first time since this descent began, there is ground back underfoot, not solid, and we will come to how unsolid in a moment, but real enough to stand on and take a breath. And there is a second way out, running alongside the first, and it strikes even closer to the root of the fear. Look back at where the nightmare drew its power. Every step of it rested on one unexamined assumption, so natural that we never stopped to question it, that you ought to think of yourself as a random draw, one observer pulled blindly from the great urn of every observer there will ever be. But two physicists, James Hartle and Mark Srednicki, asked in 2007 whether we are entitled to assume any such thing. We have direct, first-hand evidence that we exist, here, inside a coherent world. We were never issued a ticket certifying that we are an average specimen. Plucked at random from a cosmic lottery, we have no particular reason to believe we are even entered in. A theory, they argued, is not incorrect merely because it predicts that we are atypical. Let go of the demand that we must be typical, and the reductio, which needed us to be typical in order to work at all, loosens its hold. It would be dishonest, though, to let you believe either door swings fully open. Neither argument quite closes the case, and the reason has the same shape as the trap itself. Take the first one. The sheer abundance of order in your world. A determined skeptic has a reply ready, and it is a good one. What if the coherence is not real, but only feels real? What if the fluctuation that made you also stitched into you the false impression of a lawful cosmos, so that the very order you are so reassured by is itself part of the counterfeit? Then the enormous bill was never truly paid. It was only painted onto the invoice. The argument bends under this and does not quite break. What it leaves in your hands is not certainty. It is something more modest, and in the small hours, perhaps enough. A very good reason to believe you are real, standing in for a proof you were never going to get. So the richness of your world is a strong argument, maybe even close to a winning one, but not a knockout. And the physicists who wrestled hardest with all of this knew it perfectly well. Which is why, in the end, the ones who found the most decisive answer did something unexpected. They stopped trying to prove the nightmare false. They turned instead to a stranger and quieter question, one that does not ask whether a universe overrun with phantom minds is true or not, but whether such a thing could ever, by anyone, actually be believed. It is a genuinely odd question to ask of a scientific claim, not whether it is true, but whether anyone could believe it and still be making sense. We are used to theories that come out simply right or wrong, confirmed or refuted by what we observe. This is something else. The possibility that a theory might be, in a subtle and fatal way, impossible to hold. That the very act of believing it could pull the ground out from under the belief. It sounds at first like wordplay, and it is anything but. It turns out to be the sharpest tool anyone has found for dealing with the Boltzmann brain. Suppose you let yourself believe it, believe, with the arithmetic apparently on its side, that you are most likely a brain fluctuated for a single instant out of the dark. Follow that belief honestly all the way to its end. If you are such a brain, then your memories are fictions and your senses are inventions, and the faculty you are reasoning with right now is nothing more than a chance heap of particles that fell for one moment into the rough shape of a thought. But that faculty is the only thing that carried you to the conclusion in the first place. The instant you accept that you are probably a Boltzmann brain, you have also accepted that you have no good reason to trust the reasoning that brought you there, and with it no good reason to accept the conclusion at all. The belief reaches back and soars through the branch it is sitting on. It cannot, in the words of the physicist Sean Carroll, be at once true and justifiably believed. The name for that strange condition, a belief that dissolves the grounds for holding it, comes from the philosopher David Albert, who called such a thing cognitively unstable. And notice what it does that the earlier arguments could not. The abundance of your ordered world made it merely unlikely that you were a ghost. A stubborn skeptic could always insist the order was painted on. This cuts deeper and leaves no such room. It does not matter how the probabilities are counted or whether the coherence around you is real or faked. Any chain of reasoning that arrives at you are probably a random fluctuation has, in the very act of arriving there, destroyed its own right to be trusted. The conclusion, if you reach it, quietly refutes the road you took to it. It is a key that turns smoothly in the lock only because the door was painted on the wall. It opens onto nothing, because the reasoning that seemed to lead somewhere has undone itself along the way, which forces a complete change in how to see the Boltzmann brain itself. All this time, it has worn the costume of a prediction, a horror the universe was supposedly making about us, an announcement that most minds, perhaps including yours, are fleeting delusions in the cold. That was never what it was. It is a tripwire. When a model of the cosmos, worked out honestly, turns out to predict that the typical observer is a Boltzmann brain, physicists do not receive that as chilling news about reality. They receive it as proof that the model is broken, and they throw the model out. The brain is not the discovery. It is the alarm that tells you a theory has failed somewhere upstream. Sean Carroll's blunt little paper on all this, the one with the worried title, "Why Boltzmann Brains Are Bad," is not an argument that we are brains. It is an argument for how to use them, as a test that any acceptable picture of the universe has to pass by not being overrun with them. We are not the prediction. We are the ones reading the alarm. And there is one more door, the one left ajar much earlier, when we admitted that no one is entirely sure how literally to take the restlessness of empty space. If the mainstream picture holds, If the vacuum truly seethes, truly works through every arrangement given enough time, then the brains are at least possible, however we go on to argue them away. But Carroll, together with Kimberly Boddy and Jason Pollock, has argued that a genuinely stationary emptiness may do no such thing. A quantum state that never changes is, in the most literal sense, not doing anything. There are no events inside it, no moments, nothing that flickers or nucleates or comes to pass. On this reading, the seething was only ever a figure of speech, and a truly quiet vacuum left to itself forever produces exactly nothing, not one brain, ever. It is far from settled. But if it holds, then the factory of ghosts we have spent so long dreading was never running at all. So the way out is real, and there is more than one of them. But the shape of that escape deserves a clear-eyed look, because it is humbler than the fear that sent us searching for it. We did not find a proof that you are real. There is no such proof, as we saw at the very bottom of the descent, no test that works from the inside, and there never will be. What we found instead is that the alternative cannot be coherently believed, and was never a claim about you to begin with. We do not defeat the ghost so much as decline to hold a thought that unmakes itself and recognize it at last as a tool that wandered in wearing the mask of a fate. Certainty was never on the table. Coherence was, and coherence, it turns out, is enough to live on. So you can set it down now, the whole cold weight of it. Not because it was proven false, but because it was never yours to carry. It was a diagnostic, and you are not the diagnosis. Let the fear go, gently, the way you would loosen your grip on something you had been holding too long without noticing. And know, as you do, that while the physicists were taking the idea apart from the inside, the universe itself may have been quietly closing the same door from the outside, because the far, endless eternity the whole nightmare leaned upon may not be coming after all. The newest measurements, some of them gathered in the very year these words were written, have begun to whisper something that would bring the story to rest in a way almost no one saw coming. For a long while now we have been staring into the far future, the emptying sky, the last stars going out one by one, the cold that sinks down and never quite finds a floor. For most of this journey that emptiness has been the enemy, the stage the whole nightmare required, the endless dark in which the ghosts could gather, one lonely flicker at a time, across forever. Something has changed, though, in how we are able to look at it now. The dark out there is exactly as vast as it ever was. It has simply stopped being a thing to be afraid of. It has been a long way down. We began with a stray thought in the margin of an old argument, and we followed it through the strange one-wayness of time, out into an eternity of cold, down to a mind that assembles itself from nothing, and then all the way to the bottom, to that place where there was no test you could run and no way at all to be certain of your own past. And then, slowly, we climbed back, up through the sheer abundance of your own ordered world, and up to the recognition that the whole terror was, in the end, a tool that could never even be coherently believed. It was a real descent, and you came back from it. Very few things the universe can hand you are frightening on the way down and consoling by the time you reach the far side, because everything we have feared leans on a single beam, and it is time now, near the end, to name it plainly. Every fluctuated mind, every impossible tower of years stacked upon years, every census in which the strangers outnumber the born by a margin with no name, all of it rests on one requirement above all others: that the universe go on without end. Time without limit is not some detail of the nightmare. It is the entire floor it stands on. A brain that takes 10 to the 66th years to appear is no threat whatsoever in a cosmos that quietly runs out of years to give it. Remove the eternity, and the whole vast structure of dread for all its terrible and flawless arithmetic, is left with nowhere at all to happen. And a genuinely strange possibility has arrived, almost exactly in time for the end of this story. Over these past 2 years, that assumption of eternity, which for a generation had felt as secure as anything in all of cosmology, has begun, very gently, to tremble. A great survey called DESI, patiently mapping the positions of millions upon millions of galaxies to trace how the expansion of space has changed across the whole history of the universe, has turned up something nobody ordered. The dark energy that drives the galaxies apart, the thing we had taken to be a fixed and permanent feature of empty space, may not be fixed at all. It may be weakening, fading by imperceptible degrees as the ages pass. And if that proves true, if the force flinging the universe apart is not eternal but something that slowly ebbs, then the far future may look nothing whatever like the cold, faintly glowing forever we have spent so long dreading. The universe might never settle into that endless emptiness at all. It might instead do something with an ending quietly folded into it, slow and turn and gather itself back inward, or simply thin away and cease, in some manner that never leaves an infinity of time lying idle for an infinity of accidents to fill. And a universe that ends is a universe with no room in it for a single Boltzmann brain. The ghost's need forever. Forever, it is just possible, is not coming. We have to be careful here, and honest, because this is science caught in the middle of happening, not a tale with a ribbon tied neatly around it. The hints from DESI are only hints. They have not yet crossed the hard line that physicists demand before they will let themselves call a thing real, and taken on their own, without other measurements leaned up against them, they remain entirely consistent with a dark energy that never changes by a hair. The whole shimmer of it may yet dissolve into nothing, a trick of instruments, a fold in the assumptions. But it may not. Another great eye, the Euclid telescope, is expected to hand back its first serious verdict on this very question within a few months of the night you are hearing these words. We are living, right now, in the short handful of years when the answer is being decided. And we honestly do not know yet which way it will fall. So, the largest question this long descent leaves us holding is not, in the end, the one we came in with. It is no longer whether you are a mind adrift in the dark. That turned out to be a false question, a diagnostic wearing a mask, a weight you were never actually required to carry. The real question, the one still genuinely and beautifully open, is at once gentler and grander. Will the universe last forever, or will it not? Everything we have followed tonight, the ghosts, the counting, the whole long architecture of the fear, hangs, in the end, on that one slender thread. And the honest answer, tonight, is that no one alive knows. We are a young species, on a small and ordinary world, looking up into the enormous dark and measuring, and guessing and waiting for the sky itself to tell us how the story comes out. It is a good thing to hold on to as we rise up and away from all of this, how small and how human its beginning truly was. A man in Vienna, well over a century ago, worn down by an illness that no one in his time had a name for, who had given his whole life to insisting that the world was built of tiny invisible atoms and that all order was only ever a rare and passing accident. In the margins of a dry argument about the behavior of gases, he set down a single stray thought about the universe as a whole, credited it graciously to a young assistant whose name the world very nearly lost, and moved on. He never had the slightest idea what he had started. He never lived to learn that the atoms he had fought for all his life were real. He lies now beneath one short line of mathematics in a cemetery on the edge of Vienna, and the strange, patient seed he left behind grew across the century that followed into this. A question able to reach a person lying still in the dark tonight and ask them softly whether they are real. Rise higher still, past the man and his century, past the small blue world he stood on, past the sun and all its neighbours, until the whole of it, Vienna, the earth, every human life there has ever been, the 100 billion galaxies, draws together into a single grain of light, adrift in an ocean of dark. From out there, the universe does not look cruel. It does not look kind either. It does not look like anything at all, because looking is simply not among the things it does. It has no notion that we are here. In all its unthinkable reach and age, through every fluctuation and every slow collapse, it has never once taken the slightest notice of a single one of us. And it never assembled a mind on purpose, never intended the dread, never meant the peace. It only is, enormous and indifferent and unaware. And somehow, briefly, we happened inside it. That indifference, which by every right ought to be the coldest fact in all of this, turns out to carry a strange warmth in it, if you rest with it long enough. A universe that never meant you any harm cannot be out to get you. The void was never once plotting the nightmare. The nightmare was something we found in it by thinking too hard, and so it is something we are free to set gently back down. The cosmos does not know that you are here, and yet, here you are. Small and brief, and made of the very same restless matter as the stars and the empty spaces between them, but awake. Aware enough to look up into all that vast unknowing and wonder whether any of it, yourself included, is truly real. In a universe that spent very nearly the whole of its history with no one anywhere inside it to notice anything at all, the fact that one small fold of it should open its eyes and think the thought "I am here" may be the strangest and least likely signal there has ever been. So let the last of the fear go now. All of it. If your memories are real, the faces and the rooms, and the long gathered weight of an actual life, then they are a gift, and tonight you can hold them a little more tenderly for having so nearly lost them to an argument. And if, against everything, against all the odds we have counted and every reason we have found to doubt it, this mind did somehow condense out of the warm dark only a few moments ago, wearing a past that never took place, then even that takes nothing away from what is true in this instant. Because this moment is real. The voice in your ears is real. The dark around you is real. The slow rise and fall of your own breathing is real. Whatever it was that assembled you, you are here now, and here is happening, and here is the only place that any of us has ever, for even one instant, actually lived. You do not have to settle it tonight. You do not have to know how the universe ends, or whether it ends, or whether the one who wakes tomorrow is the same one now drifting down towards sleep. None of that is yours to carry into the dark with you. The stars will go on burning without your watching them. The far future will keep its own slow and patient time, and the small, improbable, wide-awake fact of you is allowed, at last, to loosen its grip and rest. Close your eyes. Let the vastness be a blanket, and not a threat. There is nothing out there in all that endless dark that wants a single thing from you. Nothing to solve, nothing to fear, nothing to answer, nothing left to do but breathe and soften and be here. For as long as here goes on, there is time enough for all of it later, not now. Now there is only this, the dark, the breath, the small warm fact of being here at all. Rest now. You are real enough. Whatever else is or is not true, this was real. Sleep well. Good night.